When you drop $20,000 on a Birkin, you expect Parisian ateliers, candlelit stitching sessions, and a whisper of French luxury in every seam. But what if I told you that dream is a $15 billion lie? Hermès, the crown jewel of luxury, has just been caught red-handed, not by rivals, but by their own secret factories in China, who are blowing the whistle and exposing the dirty truth behind those made in France labels. Lawsuits are flying, TikToks are going viral, and the entire fashion world is panicking. Buckle up, because once you know the truth, you'll never look at luxury the same way again. For decades, Hermès didn't just sell handbags, they sold an entire fantasy. A dream of old-world craftsmanship, of a romantic France that only existed in the imagination. Every ad, every whisper about their Birkin and Kelly bags reinforced it. These weren't just accessories. They were heirlooms, crafted by master artisans, touched only by the most delicate hands and tucked away Parisian ateliers where time moved slower, where each stitch was a love letter to tradition. It wasn't just luxury, it was the idea of luxury. Waiting lists that stretched for years, quiet invitations to private showrooms, celebrities and royalty showing off their bags like badges of honor. And behind it all, the image Hermès carefully protected, the wise, aging craftsman, hunched over a workbench, lovingly hand-stitching a piece of history under the soft Parisian light. They made the public believe that when you bought Hermès, you weren't just purchasing a product. You were buying into a legacy, a rarefied air of taste, patience, and exclusivity. We believed it. The world believed it. Until the cracks started to show. Because behind the fantasy, hidden from the boutiques in New York, Paris, Tokyo, and Milan, there were rumors. Whispers that not every bag was born in a sleepy French workshop. That not every stitch was laid by a master artisan who'd trained for a decade. There were murmurs of factories, not ateliers, where the pressure to churn out Birkins and Kellys wasn't about preserving tradition, but about meeting skyrocketing demand from China, from Dubai, from anyone desperate enough to spend six figures to join the Hermès Club. And then came the revelations that turned whispers into worldwide scandal. Reports surfaced of sweatshop-like conditions, not in the charming French countryside, but elsewhere. Anonymous industrial sites where workers labored under quotas and surveillance, assembling the very bags sold as handmade with care. Workers who didn't spend years apprenticing under a master, but who were trained just fast enough to meet the growing hunger for new bags. This wasn't the artisanal dream Hermès had sold to the world. This was mass production hidden behind a silk curtain of marketing. And worse, the brand, so meticulous about every aspect of its image, seemed to know. After all, how else could they promise ever more product while maintaining the illusion of exclusivity? How else could they meet a global luxury market that had ballooned into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth? In one blow, the fantasy crumbled. The myth of the lone Parisian craftsman was replaced with the ugly truth of globalization, demand, and profit margins. The same forces that had cheapened other luxury brands were now touching even Hermès, the supposed last holdout of true luxury. And customers were left wondering, were they ever buying art? Or were they buying a very expensive lie, wrapped in an orange box? For years, Hermès clutched their secrets tightly. Secrets they insisted were stitched lovingly into every Birkin and Kelly bag. But no secret stays hidden forever, especially not one built on the backs of workers who, until now, had been voiceless. And then it happened. The wall cracked. And when it crumbled, it wasn't a whisper that came out. It was a roar. A group of Chinese manufacturers, once gagged by contracts, fear, and the overwhelming power of the Hermès brand, finally broke their silence. They stepped into the light and said what no one, not even the most cynical critics, had dared to say out loud. We made the Birkins, not knockoffs, not dupes, not inspired by models sold in shady markets. The real thing. The bags sold in Hermès boutiques, flaunted by billionaires and socialites. The very bags customers waited years to even be offered. And it didn't stop there. These manufacturers didn't claim they were doing a few stitches here and they're under supervision. They weren't background players. They weren't trimming leather edges or polishing completed bags. No, they were doing 80% of the work. 8. 0. The handmade in France tag was now stained with a truth no amount of branding could scrub away. Factories half a world away, not artisan workshops, have been pumping out Birkins under intense quotas, under ruthless conditions, while Hermès maintained the illusion of scarcity and craftsmanship. The very soul of Hermès, the idea that every bag was a slow, careful labor of love by a French artisan, shattered. Because what the world thought was the Mona Lisa of handbags turned out to be more assembly line than art form. And just when the public thought it couldn't get more damning, Tanner Leatherstein, the leather expert with a scalpel sharper than any PR statement, stepped in, receipts in hand, ready to slice open the myth. Known for dismantling designer goods to expose what's really inside, Tanner didn't just talk. He showed, live, on camera, with clinical precision. He gutted a Birkin. Piece by piece, layer by layer, Tanner exposed the cold, hard truth hidden beneath the buttery leather. He revealed cheaper manufacturing shortcuts, glue where hand-stitching should have been, mass production techniques that betrayed everything Hermès claimed to stand for. And his verdict was brutal. These bags, once revered as sacred relics of craftsmanship, were closer to luxury products than luxury artifacts. The dream Hermès sold? It wasn't just exaggerated. It was carefully, deliberately orchestrated fiction. Tanner's dissection wasn't just a product review. It was a funeral for an illusion people had willingly paid tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to believe. And in that moment, the world had to reckon with a brutal question. Was luxury ever about quality? Or had it always been about fantasy and power? The shocking reveal didn't just dent Hermès' reputation. It cracked the very foundation of what we thought luxury meant. Because if Hermès, the gold standard, was outsourcing 80% of its magic, what did that say about the rest of the luxury world? Maybe we weren't buying timeless craftsmanship after all. Maybe we were just buying very expensive dreams stitched together in the shadows. The moment the truth cracked open, Hermès did what every crumbling empire does when their pristine image shatters. They panicked. Behind the closed doors of their Parisian boardrooms, the crisis meetings began immediately. Frantic calls, emergency legal teams, damage control memos flying at the speed of light. Because this wasn't just a bad headline. This was an existential threat. The world had just learned that Hermès, the crown jewel of French luxury, had quietly built its empire on the labor of Chinese manufacturers. Not artisans in quaint French ateliers, but workers halfway across the globe. And now those workers were talking. Loudly. Hermès had two choices. Come clean, apologize, and risk decades of cultivated mystique crumbling overnight. Or fight. They chose to fight. In a move that stunned even the most seasoned industry insiders, Hermès pulled out their sharpest weapon. Lawsuits. They sued the Chinese factories. The very same factories they had worked with. The very same people who had been under official contracts. The very same partners they had once trusted to make, not assist with, but make, their world-famous bags. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Hermès, the gatekeepers of authentic luxury, were now in courtrooms, furiously accusing these manufacturers of betrayal, misconduct, and, in an Olympic-level display of gaslighting, acting as if they barely even knew them. They leaned hard into the narrative. These are rogue factories. They have no official ties to our brand. They're frauds, liars, criminals. But the receipts told a different story. Signed contracts, shipping records, payment trails that could stretch across continents. The evidence was damning, not for the factories but for Hermès. Because in trying to discredit the manufacturers, Hermès accidentally confirmed the very thing they were desperate to deny. That these factories had been part of their inner circle all along. The lawsuits weren't about justice. They were about fear. A desperate, last-ditch attempt to silence the truth, to scare anyone else from stepping forward, to cling to the collapsing illusion of handmade French luxury. Hermès, the once untouchable titan, now looked like any other corporation caught in scandal. Deny, deflect, destroy. And the world watched, stunned and fascinated, as one of the most powerful brands on earth squirmed under the weight of its own lies. Because if Hermès was willing to sue their own partners to save face, if they were willing to gaslight the entire world about relationships they had signed into existence, what else were they hiding? The panic wasn't just about the Chinese factory speaking out. It was about the terrifying realization that the golden mask of luxury could slip. And once it did, it could never be put back on. Hermès was no longer the serene artisan brand floating above the dirty realities of business. They were knee-deep in it, clawing, scrambling, desperate to cover the cracks before the whole facade collapsed for good. And with every lawsuit they filed, with every denial they stammered, with every gaslighting statement they released, Hermès wasn't protecting their reputation. They were setting on fire. The cracks in the Hermès fairy tale were no longer rumors whispered in dark corners of the fashion world. They were now cold, undeniable facts. And the biggest crack of all? The numbers. Because for all the talk of slow luxury and painstaking craftsmanship, there was one inconvenient truth Hermès couldn't bury. The math didn't make sense. Hermès was pulling in nearly $15 billion in annual revenue, a number so astronomical it demanded a second look. Because if each bag, each belt, each sandal was supposedly hand-stitched in tiny French workshops by a handful of artisans working at an old-world pace, how are they keeping up? How could an artisan, crafting by hand, produce enough to feed that massive, ever-growing machine? How many bags could a single craftsman make in a week? A month? A year? The reality was brutal. Even if Hermès had thousands of artisans working around the clock without rest, they couldn't meet the global demand that had exploded over the last decade. They simply couldn't. But Hermès wasn't about to admit that. Instead, they crafted another illusion, the Made in France loophole. Here's how it worked. Most of the heavy lifting, the cutting, the stitching, the molding, the assembly was quietly outsourced. Factories in China, factories that looked nothing like the sunlit Parisian ateliers in the ads, were doing up to 80% of the work. Then at the very last stage, the almost finished bags were flown to France. There, a few final touches would be added. Maybe a seam tightened, maybe a clasp adjusted, maybe a logo embossed. Just enough so Hermès could legally and smugly stamp Made in France on the label. It was a technicality, a marketing gimmick, and most damning of all, it was completely within the law. But it wasn't what the customers were being sold. Not the myth, not the dream. When you handed over $20,000 for a Birkin, you weren't paying for an almost finished bag that had taken a quick European pit stop. You were paying for the story, the fantasy of an old French artisan, lovingly crafting your treasure with decades of skill in a tiny workshop where quality trumped quantity. That's what Hermès promised, and that's what they betrayed. Because in reality, what customers were buying was a globalized industrial product, just dressed up in the emperor's new clothes. The irony couldn't have been sharper. While Hermès gate-kept their bags, fueled endless waiting lists, and cultivated the illusion of unattainable scarcity, their production model had quietly evolved into something terrifyingly efficient and far less romantic than they wanted you to believe. The numbers told the real story. You don't become a $15 billion juggernaut by sewing bags one at a time in a countryside workshop. You become a $15 billion juggernaut by scaling up and hiding it. Every stitch hidden overseas. Every rough edge smoothed over by a legal technicality. Every customer dazzled by a lie dressed up as a luxury experience. And the worst part? Hermès knew exactly what they were doing. They counted on the customers never asking questions. They counted on the mystique to cover the contradictions. They counted on the fact that nobody would dare suggest that the emperor had no clothes. But now, the numbers were speaking for themselves. And once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. The dream wasn't handmade. The dream was manufactured. And Hermès was cashing the checks. If you thought Hermès was the only one playing dirty, think again. Because once you peel back the curtain, you realize the entire luxury industry is in on the scam. Prada, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, The holy trinity of timeless European luxury, all preaching the same sermon about heritage, craftsmanship, and exclusivity, all selling the same dream. That when you spent thousands on a handbag, you were investing in something rare, something sacred, the result of centuries of artisanal tradition. But the truth? The truth is that the Made in Italy or Made in France labels are not what they seem. Not even close. Behind those glossy ad campaigns, behind the runways dripping in silk and diamonds, behind the myth of the lone artisan in a Tuscan village, there are factories, huge industrial factories, and not just in Italy, not just in France, but in China, in Vietnam, in India, in places you were never meant to imagine when you clutch your brand new bag to your chest. Here's how the con works. Luxury houses outsource the majority of the labor, the cutting, the stitching, the assembly, to overseas factories. Sometimes as much as 98% of the work is done far from the glamorous cities stamped on the tags. Sometimes the materials aren't even European to begin with. Then, when the bag is almost complete, it makes a pit stop. A zipper added here, a handle tightened there, a label sewn in carefully, strategically, in a little workshop somewhere within the borders of Italy or France. Legally, that's all it takes. If the last substantial transformation happens in Europe, they can proudly slap on that golden ticket. Made in Italy. Made in France. It's the oldest trick in the book. A trick worth billions. Because luxury isn't just about the product, it's about the fantasy. The fantasy of a sixth-generation Italian craftsman hand-sewing your Prada tote. The fantasy of a Parisian atelier breathing life into your Louis Vuitton clutch. The fantasy of Chanel seamstresses in neat little rows, singing French songs while working on your quilted flat bag. That's what they sell. That's what you pay for. And that, not the location, not the stitches, not the leather, is the lie. The lie isn't just where it's made. It's what they want you to believe. Because they know, if customers ever connected the dots, if customers ever realized that their $6,000 Italian bag was sewn mostly in a Guangzhou factory and finished with a flourish in Milan, the magic would die. The justification for those jaw-dropping price tags would evaporate. The worship of the brand names would crack. The entire house of cards could come tumbling down. So they double down on the fantasy. They drown you in it. With dreamy ad campaigns, behind-the-scenes atelier videos, luxury packaging, and endless, empty talk of heritage. Meanwhile, the real story stays locked away, tucked behind ironclad NDAs, supply chain secrecy, and a wink and nod understanding across the industry. Don't ask, don't tell. And here's the kicker. You were never supposed to find out. Not about the factories, not about the loopholes, not about the globalized machine hiding behind the word craftsmanship. But now the secret's out. And once you know, you can't unknow. You see through the polished storefronts. You see through the heritage documentaries. You see through the runway shows dripping in self-importance. You realize that the luxury dream isn't a dream at all. It's a business model. One designed to exploit your trust, your aspiration, and your willingness to believe in fairy tales. At a 5,000% markup. And the worst part? They're still smiling. Still selling. Still counting on the fact that most people, even now, would rather hold on to the fantasy than face the truth. Because in the world of luxury, the biggest product they sell is the lie itself. When the luxury world started to show cracks, it wasn't the brands who told the truth. It was an outsider, an unlikely hero, a man armed with a razor blade, a microscope, and nothing to lose. Tanner Leatherstein, a name that now sends shivers through the marble halls of luxury conglomerates, didn't just talk about the myths. He cut them open, literally. While the fashion houses were busy spinning fairy tales about artisan mastery and the finest materials on earth, Tanner was doing something radical. He was dissecting $30,000 bags. Birkin, Chanel, Dior, Louis Vuitton. No sacred cow was spared. No brand was too untouchable. One by one, he laid the legends on his workbench. He grabbed his blade, and with surgical precision, he sliced through decades of marketing illusion, layer by layer, stitch by stitch. What he found underneath, it wasn't gold. It wasn't magic. It was cheap padding. It was mediocre leather. It was mass-market construction dressed up in prestige. At first, people couldn't believe it. How could a $30,000 Hermès Birkin, the so-called pinnacle of luxury, contain leather that was no better, sometimes worse, than a $600 handbag from a mid-range boutique? How could a Chanel flap bag, sold with pomp and circumstance at $10,000, be stitched together with shortcuts that any trained leatherworker would spot from a mile away? Tanner didn't just tell us, he showed us. Under the bright lights of his workbench camera, he revealed it all. The corner cuts hidden behind double linings. The cheap fillers used instead of genuine full-grain structures. The factory sewing marks that betrayed the fantasy of handmade. The tanning processes that, while heavily marketed as heritage craftsmanship, were mass-production shortcuts barely worthy of the price tags attached. He wasn't being disrespectful. He wasn't being sensationalist. He was being honest, something the industry had abandoned long ago. And for the first time, consumers could see what luxury brands had desperately tried to hide. That luxury often had nothing to do with superior quality. It had everything to do with superior storytelling. Because in Tanner's hands, those bags, stripped of their logos, stripped of their ad campaigns, stripped of their showroom sparkle, looked normal, average, sometimes even disappointing. And that was the point. It wasn't just about the leather. It wasn't just about the stitching. It was about the illusion. The centuries-old myth that luxury meant better, when in reality, luxury just meant better marketed. Tanner Leatherstein exposed a dirty secret the industry hoped you would never realize. That you weren't paying for materials. You weren't paying for craftsmanship. You were paying for the privilege of believing a story. And the numbers didn't lie. Because while a luxury bag might retail for $30,000, the cost to make it, the real cost, material and labor combined, often hovered somewhere between $500 and $1,000. A 3,000% to 6,000% markup. The rest? A logo, a dream, a well-packaged lie. Tanner didn't need to scream it. He just had to show it. And once you saw the guts of that $30,000 bag, once you saw the foam inserts, the synthetic reinforcements, the same leather grades used by brands selling at 1/50th the price, you couldn't unsee it. He cracked open the illusion. He gutted the myth. He made it impossible to go back. Because after watching a Tanner Leatherstein tear down, walking into a luxury boutique feels different. You no longer see heritage. You see marketing. You no longer see craftsmanship. You see markups. And maybe, just maybe, you start to ask the forbidden question, what am I really paying for? And the luxury world knows it. That's why they hate him. That's why they pretend he doesn't exist. That's why they've gone into full crisis mode, trying to paper over the cracks he's exposed. But it's too late. Tanner Leatherstein didn't just cut open handbags. He cut open the luxury industry's biggest secret. And the truth is bleeding out everywhere. The luxury dream isn't just sold in boutiques. It's sold on Instagram, on red carpets, in paparazzi shots carefully accidentally leaked to TMZ. It's sold through celebrities, walking, talking, breathing billboards. When you see Cardi B flashing a new Birkin on Instagram, when Kylie Jenner casually tosses a $20,000 Chanel bag into the background of a selfie, when Hailey Bieber clutches a Dior saddlebag as she sips an oat milk latte in West Hollywood, you're not witnessing taste. You're witnessing a transaction. Because here's the truth most people don't know, and that the brands will never admit. Most of the luxury bags you see online are not bought. They're planted. They're not authentic moments of style. They're PR deals. Marketing arrangements dressed up as personal choice. Sometimes the bags are loaned. Sometimes they're gifted. Sometimes they're part of six-figure endorsement deals tied up with messy NDAs. Because for Hermès, Chanel, Dior, Louis Vuitton, placement is power. They don't need to run old-school ads anymore. They don't need to buy full-page Vogue spreads like it's 1995. No, the real battlefield is your feed. Your TikTok, your Instagram stories, your Pinterest boards. It's your subconscious thereafter, and celebrities are their Trojan horses. You see your favorite pop star, actress, or influencer carrying a bag, laughing, living her best life, dripping in what looks like effortless wealth, and you think, If I had that bag, I could have that life too. But it's a lie. Because Cardi B didn't just wander into Hermès and drop $100,000 on Birkins on a whim. Kylie Jenner didn't just impulsively build a closet of limited edition Chanels worth more than most houses. These moments are orchestrated. Behind the scenes, teams of brand reps, stylists, and PR agencies work around the clock to place these bags where you'll see them, without you ever realizing it's a commercial. It's not about selling a product anymore. It's about selling an aspiration, a fantasy. And the fantasy has to feel effortless, organic, unattainable, yet somehow just within your grasp if you hustle hard enough. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, luxury brands are handing out bags like party favors to the right celebrities and influencers. The bigger your platform, the bigger the loot. It's a numbers game. It's math. If Kylie posts a Birkin, it's worth more than any Super Bowl ad. If Hailey carries a Louis Vuitton in a street-style shot, it could spike Google searches by 300% overnight. And every spike translates to one thing: sales. But while you're emptying your savings account for a down payment on a Chanel classic flap, telling yourself it's an investment piece, remember, the celebrities flaunting them probably didn't pay a dime. They're not investing. They're cashing checks. And the brands? They're sitting back, laughing, watching their $500 marketing bag turn into millions of dollars in consumer spending. Because the bags aren't the product. You are. Your desire, your insecurity, your dream of making it. That's what they're selling. And they'll use every tool in the influence trap to reel you in. Even if it means handing $30,000 handbags to celebrities who couldn't care less. Just long enough for you to see it, want it, and convince yourself it's your dream too. But make no mistake, the luxury game isn't about quality. It's about psychology. And in that game, celebrities are just the bait. The Birkin isn't just a bag. It's a cult. A carefully engineered system of desire, manipulation, and gatekeeping, wrapped up in buttery leather and a $20,000 price tag. Because here's the first dirty little secret. You can't just walk into Hermès and buy a Birkin. You can't stroll in, credit card in hand, and say, "I'll take the black Togo leather with gold hardware, please." No, that's not how this game works. At Hermès, you don't choose the Birkin. The Birkin chooses you. First, you have to prove yourself. You have to spend. And I don't mean buying a scarf or a Twilly. We're talking thousands, tens of thousands, dropped on belts, shoes, homeware, jewelry, ready-to-wear collections that no one talks about outside of Hermès' inner sanctum. You have to court the sales associate, build a relationship, become a loyal customer. Only after you've demonstrated your devotion, your willingness to play by their unwritten rules, maybe you'll get the call. Maybe one day your sales associate will lean in and whisper, "We just received a Birkin. Would you like to see it?" Not choose it, not customize it. See it. Because another secret, you don't pick the color, the size, the leather, or the hardware. They offer you what they have, and you take it or you don't. And if you say no, good luck getting offered another one. Hermès weaponized scarcity like no other brand on earth. Not because there aren't enough Birkins. Factories, as we've seen, are humming away 80% in China, cranking out more Birkins than the market could ever actually absorb. The scarcity is manufactured, controlled. It's not a bag shortage. It's a power play. Because the harder it is to get, the more people want it. The more hoops you have to jump through, the more special the bag feels. And Hermès knows, if you finally get your hands on one, you're not just buying a handbag. You're buying status, validation, a seat at a table that most people don't even realize is rigged. You're buying the idea that you're one of the chosen few. But the truth? It's a pyramid scheme in a box. The real prize isn't the leather. It's the illusion. The prestige of being seen with a Birkin, of flashing that subtle flex to a world trained to recognize it. Meanwhile, the game gets dirtier. There's a whole secondary market, underground networks of resellers, boutique flippers, even Hermès insiders, cashing in on people's desperation. A Birkin that retails for $12,000 can sell for $25,000, $40,000, $100,000 depending on its rarity, color, and condition. Limited editions? Forget it. You're paying the price of a luxury car. And Hermès? They pretend to frown at the resale market, But behind the scenes, it fuels their mythos. It feeds the legend. It keeps the Birkin name burning hotter, higher, rarer. Because if anyone could just walk in and buy one, it would lose its magic. It would just be another expensive bag. Instead, they turned it into a modern-day relic, a symbol of success, a reward for loyalty, a trophy for endurance in a system designed to make you feel lucky just to give them your money. In the cult of the Birkin, Hermès isn't selling handbags. They're selling belonging. And the scariest part? Most people never even realize they've been indoctrinated. For years, the Birkin wasn't just a handbag. It was an investment class. Resellers, collectors, even casual buyers treated Hermès bags like blue-chip stocks. Prices only ever seemed to go one way, up. Buy a Birkin, they said, and you'll beat the stock market. Hold on to it, they whispered, and you'll retire off your closet. Auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's fanned the flames, hosting glamorous handbag auctions where Birkins fetched six figures. It wasn't fashion anymore, it was finance. It was power. But now the cracks are showing, and they're getting harder to ignore. Because after the sweatshop leaks, after the Tanner Leatherstein dissections, after the ugly truths about Made in France were dragged into the sunlight, the once invincible Hermès resale market is wobbling. Prices are dipping. Whispers are turning into panic. Collectors are looking at their so-called investment pieces and wondering if the dream has finally broken. The market runs on perception, and perception is shattering. Why spend $30,000 on a bag when you know it was stitched together in a Guangdong factory, not a romantic Parisian atelier? Why flex a Birkin when the illusion, the thing you were really buying, has been punctured? In private Facebook groups and reseller forums, the conversations have shifted. Listings are sitting longer. Offers are coming in lower. Deals that used to get snapped up overnight are languishing for weeks, even months. Top-tier collectors, the ones sitting on vaults of rare Birkins and Kellys, are quietly slashing prices, desperate to unload before the bottom falls out completely. Because here's the truth. The value of a Birkin was never just about materials or craftsmanship or even design. It was about belief. Belief in the story Hermès told. Belief in the cult of rarity, of exclusivity, of Parisian magic. Without the myth, it's just leather and stitches, and leather and stitches alone don't hold resale value. Some are clinging to hope, arguing this is just a temporary dip. They say the super rare pieces, Himalayas, special orders, exotic skins, will always hold their worth. But even there, the sheen is fading. Because if the foundation is rotten, it doesn't matter how shiny the surface looks. And if collectors lose faith, if investors start seeing Hermès bags as liabilities instead of assets, the whole resale economy could implode. Luxury resale depends on illusion, on scarcity, on worship. And once the curtain's been pulled back, it's almost impossible to put it back in place. The Birkin boom was built on a fantasy. And now, reality is here. The crash is already starting. The only question left is, how far will it fall? For decades, Western media hammered a simple message into our heads. Made in China? Must be cheap. Must be low quality. Must be knockoff junk. It was convenient. It flattered Western egos. It kept the myth of European superiority alive, especially when it came to luxury. French craftsmanship, Italian leather, Swiss precision. That was supposed to be the pinnacle. That was what you were paying thousands, sometimes tens of thousands for. Not just the product, but the story behind it. Meanwhile, Made in China was the bogeyman. A label whispered with disdain, a supposed badge of inferiority. But here's the reality nobody wanted to talk about. Today, Chinese factories, the very ones demonized for decades, often outperform their European counterparts. In skill, in consistency, in quality. Because while Europe clung to nostalgia, China innovated. While European ateliers downsized, closed, or coasted on reputation, Chinese manufacturers built state-of-the-art facilities, trained artisans, and invested heavily in quality control. It didn't just catch up. In many cases, they surpassed the old guard. The irony is brutal. Some of the same factories churning out cheap goods also produce luxury items for European brands, sometimes in the very same production runs, just with different labels stitched inside. The truth is branding, not quality, has always been the real product. When you buy a $10,000 handbag, you're not paying for materials that cost $100. You're not paying for labor that cost $200. You're paying for the illusion, the fantasy carefully woven into glossy ad campaigns, red carpet placements, and Instagram dreams. Made in France on a label today often means assembled in France. A few final stitches, a buckle snapped on, a tag tied, just enough to legally stamp that magic phrase onto a bag mostly built an ocean away. And made in Italy? Don't even get started. The loopholes there are even worse. Bring a mostly finished product into Italy, make a minor tweak, and boom, it's now Italian luxury. It's a magic trick, a shell game, a marketing empire built on selective storytelling. And while the Birkins and the Chanels soaked up the glory, the reality behind the curtain was far more global, far less romantic. Consumers weren't buying superior craftsmanship. They were buying a feeling, a fantasy, a sense of belonging to something rarefied, something better. That's what luxury has always been about. Identity, not actual excellence. But now, with exposés, with leaks, with social media pulling back the veil, the bigger picture is impossible to ignore. The luxury empires weren't just selling bags and shoes and watches. They were selling lies. Beautiful, intoxicating lies. And we, willingly, hungrily, bought every word. But the question now is, what happens to the empire when the spell breaks? It's almost poetic when you think about it. The very celebrities paid to sell the fantasy. The influencers, the models, the rappers dripping in exclusive pieces are often caught carrying fakes without even knowing it. Imagine spending your life wrapped in designer logos, only to realize the bag in your hand, the one-of-one, the special edition, was stitched together in the same factory as a mass-market dupe. Or worse, is a dupe. Because when an entire industry builds itself on perception, not reality, who even knows what's real anymore? It's not just one-off mistakes. It's systemic. A luxury house releases a $30,000 handbag, but behind the scenes, it's stitched from the same quality leather a mid-tier brand uses and made by the same hands. Celebrities aren't scrutinizing craftsmanship. Influencers aren't inspecting grain patterns. They're handed a beautiful box of a red carpet moment, a marketing script, and in exchange, you hand over your blind trust and your credit card. It's not just manufacturing that's smoke and mirrors. It's marketing. It's branding. It's the entire mythology of luxury, carefully curated, ruthlessly protected, and fundamentally hollow. When even the chosen few, the faces of glamour, success, and exclusivity, are unknowingly parading around with fakes, what does that say about the system? It says the system was never built on authenticity. It was built on illusion, on making you feel like you're buying into a secret club, on whispering that you're special if you just spend enough, on blurring the lines so thoroughly that truth doesn't even matter anymore. The real question isn't whether a bag was made in Paris or Milan or Guangdong. It's whether the dream they sold you still holds up once you've seen the machine behind it. Are you paying for craftsmanship? Or are you paying for the fantasy of craftsmanship? Are you buying quality? Or are you buying a story you desperately want to believe? When the logos fade, when the resale market crashes, when the scandals spill into the light, what's left? The illusion crumbles. The mic drops. And all that's left is a choice. Now that you know the truth, are you still buying into the dream?